I wanted to talk about what you brought up with coaches of color because I made a tweet earlier in January and I pretty much deleted all of the asshole replies because we get them all the time. Anytime that you mention that the NFL needs to do a better job of hiring black coaches and GMs, you
cesspool starts to boil over.
Always get it. So I just remove those comments now. Like nobody can see them. You're talking into the ether. I end up blocking you and nobody can see your comments. So why would you make them in the first place? I guess you need to get something off your chest, but it doesn't work out well for you.
To feel like they said something.
Right, exactly. But the bigger point that I want to make is I want to have that discussion so that we get some clarity on some of the things where the standard response that I hear is just hire the best person for the job. And when those people say that, they pretend like they aren't aware. And I say pretend, it's not that they're unaware. They pretend like they aren't aware to the long storied history of Black people that are overqualified, at least as qualified, not getting opportunities because of the way they look, the way they carry themselves, the way that they talk. When you're dealing with ownership that is 70 years, 80 years old, 60 years old, however old your ownership group is, they have a certain expectation. And they might not have come around to the fact that you can have a different way of talking and a different way of communication that doesn't fit your stereotypical ideal of what a head coach looks and sounds like. And because of those innate biases that you have, you look past somebody's ability to do the job well. And that's what happens with Black coaches. That's what happens with Black GMs. And then when you start talking about the pipeline, the fact that Black position coaches don't get elevated to being a quarterback coach, which means that they aren't likely to be elevated to be offensive coordinators, which means they aren't likely to be elevated to be head coaches, because that's generally the pipeline that follows in the NFL. You're a quarterback coach, then an OC, and then you get the head coaching job. Look at what's happening right now with that. Look at what's happening right now with Kellen Moore. So when I'm saying to give these guys opportunities at the top, it doesn't just start with the top. It starts in the pipeline. And then once those guys get fired, it's like they are removed from all existence, all record keeping across the NFL, and people act like they never existed. Whereas white head coaches get multiple opportunities and turnaround times. We just talked last offseason about the fact that Dan Quinn, for whatever went wrong in Atlanta, was probably not going to be a right back to head coaching gig, but he changed Dallas's defense, and now he is at the top of everybody's list. Everybody wants Dan Quinn. 1 year removed from being fired. So when we talk about these things like Marvin Lewis, yes, he had the playoff disasters. He never won in the playoffs, but he is a damn good head coach. When we're talking about Caldwell, that got fired in Detroit, the last head coach to ever make Detroit relevant has not been sniffed for another job since then. It is ridiculous what is facing these Black head coaches. And it is 100% because people go into a situation where, yes, they might say they're looking for the best candidate, but for whatever reason, there are things about Black head coaches. I'm not calling people racist. I'm just saying that they might have biases that they don't know how to get past in these hiring processes that is keeping them from making these hires. And all we're talking about is getting them in the pipeline, giving them the same amount of second chances that other fired white head coaches get, and that evens a playing field. There's no way in a situation where most people want somebody that used to play in the NFL to be their head coach. They want somebody with NFL playing experience and a league that is dominated by Black players. There's no way in hell that you can tell me that there are only two qualified head coaches. Well, one right now, right? Because it's down to Mike Tomlin. It's Tomlin. Because Cully was fired as well. So it's down to Mike Tomlin.
It's only Tomlin.
That makes no logical sense. And anybody that's trying to tell you that it does is selling you a bag of
the
bullshit.
Enemy shrug.
He's not even being mentioned anymore. I'm not even hearing his name attached to any of these.
Hence my the enemy shrug.
And Kansas City solved all of their problems that they had in the first half. Kansas City's offense is rolling once again, and he's not like any of these lists.
It's everything that you mentioned and a whole lot more. And it's an unfortunate situation that doesn't appear to be moving in the right direction. Now the Rooney Rule exists for a reason. Now there's also cons to the Rooney Rule, because it's a facade. And what we don't need, and when I say we, I'm speaking of we as NFL fans as a whole, not just people of color, but NFL fans as a whole, because those who are not people of color, who are also NFL fans, you deserve whatever team you're cheering for, you do deserve to have the best qualified person leading your team, regardless of what that person might look like. And the problem is, like KD said so eloquently, it's not that we're saying anyone in particular is racist or whatever the case may be. We're also not going to pretend that racists don't exist and they're not out there and they're not, they haven't permeated NFL organizations. But what we are going to say is that we know for a fact, even more so than the racism itself, there's a deeper rooted system of bias that a lot of times can be so ingratiated into the cultures that you don't even realize respective to whomever is looking through the eyes at that particular culture or that that candidate. They might not even realize that they're succumbing to their own biases that may be floating around in their head that, maybe they, inherited from their parents or grandparents or environment that they might have been in, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they were not exposed to a lot of different cultures coming up through, grade school and middle school and high school, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not saying any of this is necessarily bad or controllable, because when you're a kid, you don't control where you live or where you were born or, who raised you, et cetera, et cetera. But as adults, you are well within your power to grow. Circling all the way back to what you mentioned at the beginning of this episode. You are well within your power to grow, evolve, and understand that simply because someone doesn't look like someone else, it doesn't necessarily mean, or it doesn't mean at all that they're not equally or more qualified. And I kind of joked about it online, even though I wasn't really joking because I wasn't laughing when I said it. On yesterday, when from a journalist standpoint, from a sports writer standpoint, in this field, KD, as well as I know, you and I do not fit the mold of what a sports writer looks like or what a successful sports journalist should look like. We are not that. This is a field that was for decades and decades centered around the good old boys club.
Yep.
Right. And either you were in that club and you looked and sounded like them, or you were absolutely not getting in that club. So thankfully, we were born into the generations of growth in that field, in that there, and shouts out to, the blogosphere, because for all of the flack, for all of the flack that some of the more closed-minded journalists like to throw toward the blogosphere, for example, that is essentially what helped kick the door open to a lot of different biases that existed in this field alone, that said, hey, it doesn't matter what this guy or girl or, however you identify yourself at, it doesn't matter what they look like, they can write their ass off.
Right.
And it gives you that freedom. So now what we need is the NFL to kind of wake up and understand that for 32 teams in a league that is a multi-billion dollar league that is populated from an employee standpoint by 90+% people of color, and that's not just African Americans, that's also Latino Americans, Asian Americans, so forth and so on. Just kind of depends on what team we're talking about. It's wholly unacceptable that you look at those 32 teams in a league that's populated by this much color, and you have one leader of those. And how many black owners?
None.
Okay. Zero, right? Zero?
Zero.
Okay. Yeah, that can't continue.